What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Sara Huang, and we're talking about twisting with the public sector. So how can we facilitate play that still leads to great outcomes and outputs when working with public servants? So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand, don't worry. Lean back, enjoy the show, and then visit workshops.work, find the episode, and download my one-page summary. So stay tuned. Enjoy. Hello, Sara. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear about your experience with Bureau Twist and working with the government sector and the difference it makes for the facilitation practice. And maybe before we dive into the topic, you can first give us a little bit of background, introduction. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
Such a great question, because I think the first time I really started to call myself a facilitator was after a few sessions at work. I thought, you know what? I'm not doing so bad because I started working as a policy advisor in the ministry, in the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs. And as a policymaker, all you do is try to get people involved in making policies and thinking of new and creative ways to get information. At the same time, make sure that people don't fall asleep. Because if you come with like very boring instructions and long meetings and, people are always very polite, they will give you the polite answer, but not the answer maybe you're looking for. And I started working at the ministry being, I think you would say, labeled as someone creative and maybe not a very common policymaker. And then during one time with my manager at that time, she said, you know what, I think you're a good policymaker, but not the one that we're used to. Have you thought about something that's called facilitating? And for me, coming from the background of public administration, I was like, facilitating, what's that? And that was actually my journey of becoming a facilitator. Like, okay, finding out what is it, and then finding out, well, I'm doing it already by maybe thinking of what kind of people should I invite, what kind of subject should we talk about, and how do I make sure that people don't fall asleep while doing
Wonderful.
So.
I have one question that immediately pops into my mind. Because recently I talked to facilitators about the role of neutrality. Yeah. So when I think of the role of an advisor and the role of a facilitator, how would you relate both to the concept of neutrality, and what was a shift that you have to make then switching from one role to the other?
Oh, what a great question. Thank you. I think an advisor for me is someone with an assignment. So you would say an advisor is being hired, or the main role is to get something right, or to get something in a certain direction. And in the role of a facilitator, it's more about activating the wisdom that's in the room. So in that sense, you don't have that you need the outcome to be this or that. But you are following the signals of the group to see where they want to go. And it does not mean that as a facilitator, you don't know anything about the subject, but it's more like you might even say torn because of the subject. I don't know, maybe a picture that comes to mind is if you might say that two people in a relationship and they're arguing about something and they feel passionate about it because it's their mess, you would say. The neighbor would come in and then can like give a reflection of what's going on. So that's for me. And it's different when it's not maybe the neighbor, but I don't know, that's the mother-in-law. Yes. And of course, with the best intentions, the mother-in-law will say, well, yeah, listen to and whatever, but you're getting involved. And I think the neutrality of the facilitator is indeed holding that space to help people see what is really going on here, right now. And how am I taking my responsibility or even withholding my responsibility so that together we can get to a point where we all want to get to.
So in this case, in your example, the neighbor would be a facilitator to facilitate the conversation and to clarify the argument, whether the mother-in-law might be an advisor and tell, okay, let me tell you how to do that. With all the experience I have and all the background knowledge.
Yes, indeed. And I've been this before and well, you know what we should do and things like that.
Wonderful. How did the name of your company, Bureau Twist, come up with all in your journey?
Yeah, well, Bureau is actually, you would say, a tongue-in-cheek of my experience working within the government bodies. So I think if people think of the public sector, it's a lot of bureaucracy, civil servants being not very innovative or whatever. So that's the first word, bureau. And the second word, twist, I really like it because it has three meanings. Twist can be doing things differently. Twist can be an argument, but twist can also be a dance. Let's do the twist.
Yeah. Oh, let's twist again.
Yeah, indeed. and I just love that one word has so many meanings in it. And then it also refers to a lot of things I do. There's not one reality. There are different perspectives on maybe something that happened. And instead of saying this is right or wrong, because this is how I see it, can we bring plainness to it? And can we look at it differently? And can we have a good argument about it so that maybe something creative will start from it?
How did this idea or even ideal fit into the reality of the public sector that you described before? Or maybe we all get the public sector wrong. Maybe the Dutch public sector is different than anywhere else in the world. How open are they for the twist?
There's a saying in Dutch, and it's translated to something like, the government is a monster with many heads. So I think if you would say the government as the word, the most people will come with association of indeed bureaucracy and, like there's something that's not very flexible. But at the same time, I mean, the government is huge. You have different administrations, you have different kind of people working there with different kinds of assignments, different kind of challenges. So you can't say that the government is only very static and not innovative. So I think my clients within the public administration, the governmental bodies, they are people with the assignment that they understand the importance of system thinking, the importance of the stakeholders, because all the stakeholders hold a piece of the puzzle, and the interdependency of all these stakeholders. And we have to get them in the room and maybe even first realize this problem is so complex that we cannot solve it on our own. We need each other. And we have been doing that for a long time with the best intentions, but we also realize we're not getting where we want to be. So therefore, there is an invitation or an opening to do things differently, to bring a new perspective, and also knowing that play is actually a natural state of being in the flow and being creative. So let's try a little craziness. Maybe not too crazy, but just to bring the other side in as well. So I think my clients have always been very open to it. And that's also because maybe during the intake, one of my statements always, we don't play just because we play. We play because we want to get to a certain result. So this is what I would advise you to do, because this is, if I hear it, I really did listen to what you want to achieve. I think this is the best way to get there.
And when you say play, what do you mean?
Actually, different kind of things. I would say play is a method to get the brain to pay attention. Just like when you and me are talking, maybe it seems like we're listening to each other, but maybe there's a back of my mind also making grocery list. I need some milk today, and then I'm still talking to you, but I'm not giving you my full attention. I think especially when it comes to workshop, when we get all these important people in the room, they made their time to commit. That's also really make use of the attention of people. And mostly you can do that with play. And it can be something small, like, well, maybe even getting the line of, instead of people checking in and just asking, well, how many years have you been working in this field? Getting the line. So get people to talk to each other. Sometimes I invite artists in my workshops when it's mostly difficult subjects such as inclusion, conflicts. And the artists, they just sketch what's being said and association they have. And then within the break, you have a huge wall of different sketches. And it's just like going to the Efteling and then you want to find your own picture. And people will start looking at the sketches and then conversation will emerge. And that's also kind of play. So,
sorry to interrupt. When you say artists, would you mean visual facilitators or really just artists who are not related to the field of facilitation?
I haven't used visual facilitators because the clients I work with, they're already quite familiar with visual facilitation. And for me, visual facilitation is a great storytelling of what's going on in the room. And somehow, for me, working in the stakeholders field, when I'm not in the room, I do follow the story, but I don't get that sense of feeling or what happened in the room. So the artists I work with, they have small sketches. It's more like a Kodak moment that you have like this picture, but then made with paints and everything. Somehow they catch the atmosphere. So it's more like a storybook that you can flip through. Because of these paintings, you get your own idea what might happen in the room, have happened. So you get more stories to emerge. So you have a story of people who are in the room, and then afterwards, if you would show the pictures, people will ask questions like, hey, what is this Kodak moment say? And why is it? And then you get this storytelling. So that's why I love working with them.
Yeah. It just reminds me of what I heard from other guests like Sunny and Sam and Matthias, what they tell me about visual recording. That's why I just wanted to clarify whether this is what you mean. And it sounds quite similar. Yeah. So to come back to the public sector and playing with public sector, playing with policy. I feel a lot of discomfort, maybe defense mode from participants. How do you implant this workshop mindset? How do you get them to open up and to be ready to play with you?
Well, I totally understand the fear of, public policy. That's like huge, and that's the responsibility, and that's about these big subjects and norms, and then you have to protect as well. And I always come with this painting you would say. I said, well, imagine you have to change a huge building. And then you can sketch it like, okay, this is the project plan. This is how we're going to do it. And then you rebuild the whole building. And then after 2 years, you're like, oh, that was actually a bad decision. So now we have this huge building that's not according to. And instead of doing that, maybe we can start with the smallest room and try to build there what we want to do, what we think it's going to be. And then we can say, after that room is done, what are we feeling about it and what can we improve from it? So that's actually how I try to get the play mindset within the room. Just like we're not playing because we're here to have a jolly good time. We're here to play to minimize the risk of doing it wrong.
It reminds me of the concept of play for children. So children play basically to learn, right? So they play mother and child, and they play doing groceries, and they play preparing food. So this is the kind of similar concept of play that you would use for your workshops? Playing as a tool for learning?
Yes, indeed. Because I think human beings, when we see things, we can relate to it. And especially in the public sector, people are well educated, people have a lot of experience. So we're trained in talking and convincing each other. So there's a lot of going on in the room, but there are words being spoken, but you cannot see it. But the thing is, if you could make things or make an idea, I would say concrete, and you can touch it. So let's say if you want to build a sustainable world, and you can have a lot of theories about it, but what does it look like? And you have to, if you make a drawing or you have to put it like in a Lego, what does that look like? And if you put this, if this is a scenario and you would move some of the elements, what would that do to that field? Maybe things will fall apart. Oh, wait a minute. When it falls apart, what plan B do we have? So it's very quick. It's instant. And you're playing to get more insight of what might happen. And that in the context of system thinking, interdependency, and of people holding a piece of the puzzle. That's what you need.
Yeah. I'm curious because, I mean, we both live in the Netherlands and I just moved here. And I haven't been in direct contact with the Dutch government. But what I heard is that the tendency is to rather agree with everyone or to find synchronicity. How do you call it in English? How would you deal? Oh, first question is this a reality that people like to conform and to have the same opinion? And if so, how do you challenge that in order to get the diversity and to challenge their ideas to really come up with something new? Because if everyone likes to agree, the likelihood of something new to emerge is rather small, I would say.
There are actually two comparisons I make. One is when I do quite polarized subjects within the Netherlands, such as the Black Pete or wearing the burqa on the street, and what do you feel about it? Is very polarized. So we are trying to get connections, but then sometimes because we're so focused on connection, we try to like flatten things down. And the comparison I make is that I say, well, just imagine you have coffee and you have milk. So in the Netherlands, it's called like koffie verkeerd. So if you take a sip of that, it's not really coffee, it's not really milk, it's like, eh. And sometimes to get things sharp, you need to know what's coffee and what's milk. So that have all the arguments for the coffee, and that have all the arguments for the milk. And then you can decide for yourself, what's the ratio you want with the coffee or the milk?
Do you want a latte, cappuccino, cafe verkeerd?
And, you know, like going to Starbucks, I would like to have a latte with skim milk or oat milk or whatever. You have your own preferences. But if you don't know what the value is of each argument and really, really listen to each argument, really listen to whatever. You don't have to agree yet, but you have to listen to it. And then you can decide for yourself. And I think first decide for yourself and then taking the responsibility of, and we're in this together. So if I think I would like to have a latte, but you would like to have an espresso, and we're stuck together for the coming 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years, how are we going to do this? And that is the step that I think, should be making more, instead of reaching for the consensus of, let's just agree on coffee verkeerd, because everybody like coffee and everybody like milk.
Yeah. I like the idea of, I like what you explain. Let's get straight on what coffee means and what milks means, and what are the benefits. How would you do that? Would you just do small groups, or everyone writes down, or as a group discussion to really focus on one thing first and see the pros and the cons? And then, because I think it can be very difficult to hold back if you're really for coffee and you don't like milk, or maybe even you're allergic to milk. Mentally and emotionally, you might not be ready to just focus on the benefits of milk. So what are your tricks? How do you make it work through play, maybe?
Yeah, and I think indeed the playfulness is what helps, because when it comes to conflict, well, first within the design, I try to follow, you say, human nature. So maybe I would say, you know what, it's very natural that maybe you don't like conflict, because just how you're raised. And I usually use myself as an example. Like, well, I haven't learned when I was growing up how to deal with conflict efficiently or being creative. But maybe you're someone who are very good in conflict. You're like, hey, bring it on, and let's have a good conversation about it. But then within interaction, you don't always ask, hey, excuse me, what's your relation when it comes to conflict? Are you the one likes to be in the argument, or are you the one?
That's such a good point, because we have all a different relationship to conflict. And some of us take it personally and others don't at all, and we don't know beforehand. Good point.
And it's very confusing. Let's say if I was the one want to avoid it, and you are someone who likes to, hey, bring it on. So maybe you are in full mode, like, hey, bring it on, and I'm like avoiding all the time. Then it's also not a good fight. So just bring attention to it. And mostly I have people to walk in the room just to take a stand, let's say. And of course, we're all well-educated people. We've been to trainings and we know what kind of, but if you will peel that all away, just how you are, where would you stand? And so people first get a sense of, okay, this is how I would react to conflict. What's my first training, you would say? And then when it gets to the heat, when it gets to, let's say, I don't know, this example of the coffee and the milk, I would say, well, you know what? And maybe try to stand on the side of the milk. Or if I see that the group is really stuck, I will also say, well, and it's all very natural because you have strong feelings of this side. But what if we would try to go to the other side? And also when one of the methods I work with, the deep democracy, with the Lewis method, is just to frame it like, hey, and sometimes when something is really, really hot, we will say, it's like in watching a tennis game. You see the ball like going very fast, and then I will try to slow it down, like in slow motion, so you can see where the ball is going, where does it hit the ground, and where does it go up, so that we can hear each other better.
How do you do that?
Well, maybe you will recognize sometimes within the session, within the workshop, it seems like a small comment. Someone will bring it in, and either it will be silence for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, nobody's saying anything, or everybody's. Those are the moments when it's very silent, you could say, hey, that's interesting, or whatever framing you would give it to. Someone said this, and then nobody reacted. Or when everybody's talking, and I'll be saying, hey, wait a minute, remember the tennis game? how great, there's this ball, let's go slow and go back. Someone said this, and then everybody reacted. So in order to try to hear what everybody's saying, who can I give a word to say the first reaction? So those are the interventions I try to do to get people to slow down and really hear what's there, and also hear actually the wisdom and the richness in the room.
Yeah. What I hear from what you're saying, and correct me if I get it wrong, if I just make it up, it sounds as if you would introduce all these pictures, like the tennis game, like the play, like the milk and the coffee, so that you have kind of a visual representation of what is happening that you can then refer to as soon as it happens. Is this what you're doing?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Do you ever feel you're tired of the trip from home to the home office? That the physical confines of your house are not getting you the exposure to the new ideas that you need? Maybe you need Mastermind. At Mastermind, you work together with a group of peers who help you bring new perspectives to your challenges, to find new solutions, and who you can even give a little bit back to by helping them solve their problems. In a compressed 2 hours, you'll get a day's worth of learning. So why don't you get out of that box and come to Mastermind? workshops.work/mastermind.
I have two things in mind that I would like to discuss in the little time we're having. One is decision making, because I think that especially in the public sector, decision making is more complex than finding a decision in the room, because there are so many more layers that are literally political. So how do you deal with that as a facilitator working with the public sector? Is it something that you would be briefed about beforehand, how much space of navigation you actually have when it comes to an output that you work on?
I love the gesture you're already making, indeed. Like, what is the room? And actually, mostly when I do the intake, mostly when I do an intake for the workshop, I also make it a game. So, I do have my set of questions, but I make it like in the game of card sets, and then people can take a question. And one of the things I ask is also, what's the ideal outcome and what's the ideal output of the session? And then also, like, when we look further in the future, how does this workshop contribute to what goal? So it's like a growth kind of path, like, you want this session, but why would you want this workshop? So what is the goal that you're working on, and how can this workshop help within that? And then it also sets boundaries, because if you know what the ideal output and outcome is, also means you know who will be in the room. And then you also know the people in the room, what can they really achieve? So what's their navigation in there? What's their room? And then with that ideal output and outcome, looking at what goal it will contribute to, who will you need? So those are actually the things I try to get clear within the intake already, because me having the experience of being a policy advisor, nothing is as frustrating as going to a workshop, spending your time, having all these flip overs of action points, and then seeing nothing else come from it. And then complaining to each other, you know what, but you know, it went to this and that, and people don't agree. But no, that's bring it to yourself as well. You were in that workshop and you also had this idea. What can you achieve, and where would you need others for? Instead of, we come with these great action points, but because other directors of politics didn't agree, it didn't go through. That's frustrating.
Yeah. So once you finished the intake and you know about the room and the space of navigating regarding output and outcome, would you then brief also the participants and say, okay, this is the area we are talking about, and and these are the limits. So everything that is within the scope of our conversation and design and everything that is outside, or how transparent would you be about that?
One of the greatest sentences I've learned during my path of facilitation is, it is not my task to solve anything. I'm here to bring awareness. So within the workshop, actually what I'm constantly doing is knowing this far, that this is what we're doing right now. What does it mean for us as a group? Which direction are we then going into? And maybe even because within the public sector, we don't, well, at least the assignments that I do, sometimes it's a few hours, 2 or 3 hours, sometimes 4 hours, and then just constantly bring awareness, knowing that this is a meeting of 4 hours, and we have already talked 2.5 hours. There's 1.5 hour left. What do we want to do with the remaining 1.5 hours? How would it be satisfying for all people here? And then also maybe looking back at the goals formed at the beginning of the workshop. Are we still happy with what we want to achieve?
Yeah, thank you. What's your favorite exercise in a workshop?
Well, I have a lot of favorite exercise, but one of the exercise that brings a lot of joy is something that's called the caterpillar leader. It works. It works well with a lot of people. So that's I would say from 10 to 20, 25, or even larger if you're brave. And well, it's a reflection kind of exercise. So I would say to people, who would like to be the leader? I would need one volunteer. So the one will be the from behind, and people will line up. So with the back to each other.
Like a polonaise.
Yeah, indeed, like a polonaise. And then I would say to the one being the back, well, congratulations, you're the leader. And because I'm the public sector, and you know what, we don't have a lot of money, so you have limited resource. You have to guide these people to whatever that's from point A to point B, but you don't have a lot of resource. So this exercise has to be in silence. If you squeeze the left shoulder, it's going left. If you squeeze the right shoulder, it's going right. And if you squeeze twice in both shoulders, it's stop. Good luck. And I mean, of course, you have to do it in silence. And then you imagine already that people are like, oh, where is this going? And everybody's projecting at the leader, you're not doing it well. And so it's just a lot of fun. But when people come back, I reflect on how does it feel to do this exercise, and a lot of feeling of frustration also with the leader. And I said, well, and what do you recognize this on the work floor? Because it's a lot of bureaucracy, it's a lot of delay. And then I will also say, well, you have to do it in silence, but how come you didn't use sign language, or everybody heard the assignment, you're just going from A to B? Why were we waiting for the leader? Why did the other didn't just go, or whatever? So I just love this exercise of people. It's fun, it's embodiment, and it brings a lot of topic to talk about.
Wonderful. And talking about leadership, and the public sector is hierarchical by nature.
Yes.
How do you relate to the concept of flattening the room so that every voice is the same? And how would you deal with the situation of hierarchy to get everyone's voice heard?
I think a lot of has to do already with the preparation. So it starts with the intake, the realization of the one who hired me, what's the agenda of the one hiring me, but also what are other voices. So let's say someone would hire me and say, well, you know what, I want the team building. Oh, I want people to collaborate better. And then because I think it's not going very well, or da-da-da-da-da, I would also think, okay, and who do I also need to speak before this workshop? So it already starts with who has opinion on this, and how can I integrate all these needs and voices in the design? So it means that designing it and also being aware that there are always different kinds of stories, and the stories have their own dynamics, and the dynamics, because power is something relational. So the dynamic has to do with the power that's there. And then by small steps within the workshop, trying to bring awareness to it. So practical, for example, if I would do a session for the governmental bodies, let's say the city with the citizens, and then, I don't know, maybe universities or whatever. And I would say, well, I can imagine those are three main parties, and we all have associations or opinions about each other, not only as a person, but also where you work. And just bring voice to it. And that's saying it's not good, it's not right or wrong, but we're human beings. Sometimes I like to people watching and then say, well, that's someone who's a hipster or whatever.
Yeah.
And by not giving voice to it, I'm acting on it. So that's how I try to flatten the room.
So basically you're pointing out the human side and detaching the person from the role or the position in the organization.
Yeah, detaching, but also I would say it's more of the dance of what are you saying within the role, and what are you saying as a person, and how do they integrate? It
comes back to the coffee and the milk.
Yes, indeed.
Differentiate before integrating. Yeah,
indeed. Because let's say I would be a policy advisor working on healthcare or whatever, but I'm also a mother. And maybe I have a daughter who is very ill and goes to hospital the whole time. And I have to be aware, am I using my role to fulfill some need that I have as an individual?
Yeah, wonderful. What makes a workshop fail?
When the expectations aren't clear and the stakeholders aren't prepared. So when people just show up with, you know what, we're going to talk about sustainability today, and I'll just whatever, and then okay, come with all these post-its and come with all your forms or whatever, and then 2 hours later, that was it. But if you think about the outcome and the output, if you think about the power that will be in the room, and if you really design a process to get the wisdom in the room, to really get the most use of the resources, then you get interaction, then you get inclusion, and you get impact.
Beautifully said. Thank you. And now I'm thinking of this situation where sometimes we just don't get as close to the participants as we would like to beforehand. So personally, I also like to have conversations with the participants beforehand, just to understand what is going on for them and what everything they will bring mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever, to the room. And sometimes the person who's hiring us wants everything to go through them. So and I'm sure it happened to you, that you arrived to the workshop space and you realize that either the participants are not informed at all, or they're informed in the wrong way, or they brought, as you described, all the materials, everything they prepared, they brought, and they thought that they will now have half an hour to present that. And actually, this is not what you had in mind.
No.
Right? This has happened to me, that people were just there with piles of documents and they thought that they now have time to present that. And then how would you deal with such a situation in order not to deceive them? Because they can be quickly frustrated if you tell them, no, you don't have a stage now.
Yes.
And without disarming or making your direct client losing face.
I once had a session where I was one of the 3 facilitator, and I wasn't the one designing it. So I was asked just to facilitate.
Mm-hmm.
And they were expecting about 75 people. And I think eventually about 40 arrived. And just when people coming in, I heard people saying, what is this meeting about? Oh, I don't know. It's about, so, it was already happening. But then we were supposed to go like in breakout rooms and then introduce the question that's, okay, this is what we're going to work on. So we introduced the question and it was just silence in the room.
Scary.
And then actually I remember saying, well, there was silence and I might interpret as there's no energy within the room to work with this question. And that's not right or wrong, but I would just like to check with you as you have freed your agenda for the coming 2.5 hours. If this is not the question, that is great to know it from the start. Can we reframe it so that you could commit to the coming 2, because it is your time, not ours. So that was one way of dealing with what's there without losing face, you would say, because people are there. And I think what we sometimes forget, people are there with their best intentions. Maybe I'm being too optimistic, but I really don't believe that someone would get up and just think, you know what, be a real villain that just destroy the world today. You're trying your best, but sometimes the situation is messy.
Yeah.
But that's being human. So how can we be in this mess together and then make sense as well? So maybe in your example, when people come with all this prepared or whatever, and they're just I would say, well, I feel really sorry about it. I would be bummed as well if I were you, but this is the schedule. How would you feel? And whatever comes to my mind. Because at the same time, me as a facilitator, I also have a responsibility at that time, at that moment, to show up the best way I can and keeping the connection as well.
Yeah. I was just wondering, back then when it happened, I didn't have the experience I have now. And maybe today I would have just given them a little bit of time in maybe small groups of 4. Okay, you prepared all of that. Why don't you share for 15 minutes? And then, so it kind of, because the one part they did, then they can have a 2-4 in all. In a shorter time, just to share whatever they have prepared, to dump it somewhere.
But because of that experience, you won't forget. So the next time people come to you, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I've been here before. Maybe. There's a first time for everything.
Yeah, it's true. Wonderful. Is there anything that we haven't touched upon, that we didn't discuss, that you would like to share with the audience?
I think the last thing I want to say is just a big shout out to all the civil servants working out there. Just as I said before, I think they're really there with the best intentions, and the most people join the public sector because they want to change the world. And at the same time, it's sometimes hard to work somewhere where there's also systems, and systems are there for a reason. And they're doing their best, trying to change the world from their perspectives and also dealing with the system. And that the public sector is very flexible. There are all kinds of challenges out there and people trying their best.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, thank you, Miriam, for this opportunity of talking with you.
Wonderful. And I will put all the details on how to find you, reach you, connect to you in the show notes.
Thank you.
The bureaucracy with a twist, which is so funny because when I read it the first time, I thought of the French word bureau, which is just an office or a desk.
Yeah.
So I haven't made the connection to bureaucracy. That's nice.
And then you can play with it and have a dance with it.
Yay. Definitely. Let's dance with bureaucracy. I like that.
Yes, that's dance with bureaucracy.
And don't forget to call Sara for it. DJ Sara.
Yes, indeed. So thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you.
For your time and good luck
Thank
with
you.
everything.
Doei.
Doei.
Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.